I think one of the key areas that we've always been focusing on as we talk about Rivian, Tesla, things of that nature here is the EV sales for Ford.
Which ones stand out to you as winners and why?
Well, I still like GM and I still like Rivian.
The Model Y outsold pretty much every other competitor by 300%, was just wild.
China sells about a third of their vehicles that they sell in China are electric. Europe sells about a quarter electric vehicles today. And in the US, we sell under 10% electric vehicles.
Thing is with Tesla too, like they have been delaying plans for Mexico or for producing like a cheaper car in the 25,000 range.
All that and more. So let's get to it. Tesla stock is down in the pre-market almost 1%, sitting at 236.13. I really didn't think we'd be here at this point, but yeah. For the week, down about 7.5%. The month has reverted back to being -2. Going back 90 days, we're down over 9%. But many analysts would say this is to be expected, because if you go back an entire calendar year, Tesla is still up over 110%. It can't just keep going up forever, right? But in the interim, if you look at my call spread, it is pretty lackluster. This has not been a good start. Guess you can't win them all.
On Ford and their vehicle sales, I'd like to welcome in Kevin Green, senior markets correspondent.
A little bit of a mixed picture when you're looking at Ford sales. They actually did see an increase on a year-over-year basis, around 7.1%, and that's total ICE vehicles as well as hybrids and EVs. But that was actually a little bit lower than the street's average when you're looking at the overall growth here. Now, I think one of the key areas that we've always been focusing on as we talk about Rivian, Tesla, things of that nature here is the EV sales for Ford. That did come in at 72,600 vehicles in 2023, around an 18% increase on a year-over-year basis. And that was around 26,000 EVs sold in just the fourth quarter alone. So a pretty decent clip, but we do know that the strategy for a lot of these big manufacturers, especially when you're looking at Ford and GM, may be shifting here in 2024 as the cost of trying to ramp up the EV business is a little bit higher than what they may have expected.
Ivan, I'll start with you. Your thoughts? I mean, you've always been a fan of certain automakers, that's for sure. Which ones stand out to you as winners and why?
Well, I still like GM and I still like Rivian. GM's, they completed their negotiation with the UAW. It is an impact of about $500 per car, but on an average selling price of $40,000, it's not that prohibitive. So they were able post that to raise their dividend and initiate a new share repurchase and guide higher for cash flow. They had a great 2023 with near record deliveries exceeding 2019's pace.
Ford, GM, I guess you can remain bullish on these legacy automotive companies, but they're scaling back on their EV production. It just boggles the mind. You know where the industry is going. Tesla is obviously having no problem selling their battery electric vehicles. Now, am I asking you to beat Tesla? No, you can't. All I'm asking is for you to be you, just selling electric vehicles. Now, I know you got into the game and you realized this isn't as easy as Tesla makes it look, but if it was easy, everyone would do it. You've got to step up Ford. You've got to step up GM.
All right, Olivier, your thoughts? Names that stand out to you and why?
And I hate to admit it because I'm not bullish on Tesla, or I don't want to be bullish on Tesla, but they had an excellent 2023. So I think overall, I think the main two things are that number one, the auto industry had a great year despite economic tailwinds or headwinds rather in Europe, in China, in the United States. It did a lot better than a lot of people thought it would. Yeah,
a lot of people were screaming recession, but with numbers like these, what recession?
But Tesla especially, I thought was going to have a rough year, and they didn't. They actually increased production. I think they delivered almost 500,000 vehicles in the last quarter alone. It was almost 2 million vehicles in the past year. It's 35 and 38% growth, respectively. I think they've done super well, and they've cut costs, right? But yeah, their expansion of production and the amazing half that they had in Europe, where they basically the Model Y outsold pretty much every other competitor by 300% was just wild.
What? Pound for pound, dollar for dollar, the Model Y is the best vehicle on the planet.
Yeah, Tesla's doing well.
Where is the demand? What are consumers wanting for 2024?
They want Teslas, I think. And yeah, and to Ivan's point, Rivian is also doing really well. I mean, they're a very small player when you look at just in terms of scale. They're not quite there yet. But I think, yeah, people are looking for EVs. The EV sales are still strong. You still have a mix between the hybrids and the pure battery-powered EVs. But you're looking at 9-10% market growth. I think that's going to continue. Definitely super strong in Europe. And yeah, we've seen some adjustments. I wouldn't necessarily say that there's a pullback, but there's an adjustment in the mix of which types of vehicles that are EV powered or that electric vehicles are going to be ramping up production versus scaling back.
Tesla's delivery numbers, along with everyone else, showing that maybe there isn't an EV pullback. For the past 3 months, all we've really been hearing is how there's an EV slowdown. The demand for EVs is waning. I must be coming down with something.
For people who aren't familiar with sort of how Tesla and BYD stack up, obviously they saw BYD overtake in terms of quarterly sales here. But as we set the stage here, who is on top in terms of market share and sales and really the strength of the companies?
Tesla and BYD are really two of the most interesting stories in the electric vehicles market. Tesla is the original pure play in electrification. And of course, it started with Elon Musk and some other founders building this thing up from scratch on the back of California's EV subsidies. BYD is a little bit different. They started as a battery company in the mid 1990s, and then they transitioned over to electric vehicles over the course of many decades. In 2002, the founder of BYD purchased a state-owned auto manufacturing company called the Sichuan Auto Manufacturing Group, and they were producing a lot of internal combustion engine vehicles, which is standard gasoline-powered vehicles, for decades. When I published my book, The Great Race, in 2015, BYD was one of the largest sellers of non-electric vehicles. But now BYD has transitioned to exclusively selling electric vehicles. They don't sell a single car that doesn't have a plug on it.
BYD hasn't been selling cars nearly as long as Ford or GM. I get that. But it hasn't even been a decade since BYD was one of the largest producers of internal combustion engines. Now, every car that they sell is powered by electricity in some way, shape, or form. That's a company that intends to be around for a couple more decades. Ford, GM, if they can do it, you can do it.
So then what do you see as the potential biggest risks to their dominance? You mentioned some of these EV policies in California that have, really helped propel Tesla, but then you also have, when you look at regulators in China, you think of BYD. What do you see as the biggest risks to their respective dominance?
The EV market is still fundamentally driven by policy at the end of the day. What we saw over the last 15 years was the Chinese government just plowing money and incentives into electric vehicles. And as a result, China has become by far the dominant player in global EV markets. China sells 50 to 60% of the EVs that are sold globally in any given year. In the United States, we're trying to catch up, but we are really lagging behind. China sells about a third of their vehicles that they sell in China are electric. Europe sells about a quarter electric vehicles today. And in the US, we sell under 10% electric vehicles.
Let's not get it twisted. Regardless of government policy, this transition will occur. Granted, if you grease the skids, it'll happen faster. With the likes of Ford and GM scaling back their EV production, despite the incentives on the table, that tells me one of two things. Either their cars are that shit, or Tesla's product is just too good. The best bang for your buck. For Ford and GM to survive, I'm under the inclination that there needs to be more subsidies. But how do you give them more subsidies without excluding the likes of Tesla or Rivian? All you would be doing is turbocharging their sales. Quite the conundrum the United States legacy automakers are in.
But in order for some of these companies, especially US companies, to sort of regain some of that dominance, what is it going to take? Is it about innovation in how we charge, whether it's swappable batteries or the infrastructure itself or the software? What is going to be the key driver here to get the US back on track?
We do have some very good auto companies in the US. And I think if you're taking a global perspective, Tesla is by far the most global of EV producers. Tesla has a relatively diversified market. They sell a lot of EVs in the US, but they also sell a lot of EVs in China, about half as many by value as they do in the United States. And they have a significant market share in Europe as well. I think one of the big challenges for the United States market is that we just don't have the infrastructure to support electric vehicles. And that's not just about building new fast chargers. There are a lot of challenges to public infrastructure in the United States. Right now, the companies that are out there that are pure plays in EV infrastructure, they're not making money, they're losing money. And quite frankly, the public charging experience isn't that good. Half of the time you roll up at an EV charging station and either you or the guy next to you can't charge because the charger is broken. And even when you can charge, it still takes quite a while to juice up your electric vehicle. So for me, I have a Ford Mustang Mach-E, and it takes about 45 minutes to get from 20% to 80% charge.
There's your problem. You chose a substandard battery electric vehicle. This guy can't wait until 2025 when he can just pull up to a Tesla charging station and plug in his Mach-E. It'll be a better experience, but it'd probably be the best experience if you just switched over to the best-selling vehicle, the Model Y. I suppose some individuals are just gluttons for punishment.
You guys think a lot about the China data. We've talked about that for some time now. Seems like our EV conversation is increasingly shifting over there, where it's like Tesla's lead here, I guess, is big enough to really not be as quite exciting to like analyze, you know, GM, Ford trying to catch up, but seems like China, they've got a little bit of a harder road ahead of them.
And it's not a surprise for us that China is making headways into another major industry globally, specifically EVs. It's not going to be an easy road there as macro challenges as well. There are some macro challenges that need to be resolved, but we're seeing gradual recovery. I mean, the beat from BYD was very impressive on a quarterly basis. I think for the year, they were still behind Tesla. And, you know, it's a great company that has been making big headways into the EV industry, not just from selling cars, but also producing batteries and electronics and electric buses and trains. So, you know, it's not a surprise for us that they're in the news again, but Tesla's still the leader in that space, right? So they still did 1.85 million. They had a good year. And from a technological perspective and from a brand perspective, they continue to be leaders.
It's pretty impressive that, you know, how much time we spend talking about Tesla and the way many view it as kind of the paragon of the sector that, you know, BYD's up there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's for China in general, right? Like when you look at China tech versus US tech, same thing here. We're seeing BYD versus Tesla, BYD being overlooked despite being, you know, a great company. You know, I mean, BYD's cars are a little bit cheap. They're cheaper than Tesla, 20-30%. They operate on the lower end of the mass market. That's close to 200,000 RMB, which is like 25 to 30,000. Whereas Tesla's Model Y is at the top end of the mass market, right? So there's a little bit of a difference in pricing here. I think you'll see BYD kind of dominate the Toyota market that we've seen in the ICE, whereas Tesla is a little bit of more of a luxury brand considered. And you know, they're going to sell more cars. Their cars are cheaper. And if you look from a revenue perspective, though, Tesla is still making more money from EVs.
If you take a snapshot, Tesla is on the upper end today. What's it look like in 2 years' time, though? If you're looking in the rearview mirror, you just might miss the next generation vehicle. BYD's cars, they're not bad, and they're priced pretty good. But imagine if you pull up in a cheaper version of the Model 3 or Y, priced somewhere below BYD's plug-in hybrids and or battery electric vehicles. I believe the dynamic will suddenly change. Sell as many of those cars as you possibly can at this moment, BYD. Hopefully, you can retain some of those consumers. I can't wait until the next generation gets the volume production over there in Giga Shanghai. The internet in the entire Pacific region is going to explode.
Revenues so far 95 billion as of Q3, whereas the BYD's revenues were closer to 85-90 billion, but only 80 or 70% of that is auto. So you can see the difference here. Even when you look at margins as well, Tesla has been having better margins, but now we're seeing actually BYD close that gap. So that will be definitely a challenge for Tesla, especially in China, and now we're going to see them in Europe more. But then the thing is with Tesla too, like they have been delaying plans for Mexico or for producing like a cheaper car in the 25,000 range, which Elon Musk said it would be ready by now. I think that's going to prove to be a mistake for Tesla, and that's going to give a little bit of more of an advantage for BYD to kind of dominate that lower end of the mass market.
The 2023 Investor Day, Tesla unveiled a way that they could cut the production cost in half. You'd have to assume that this is going to benefit their current lineup, but have grand implications for any of their future products. Now, Tesla has been prone to unveiling new products a little too quickly. I believe they've learned from these mistakes. Window from unveil of the next-gen vehicle to first deliveries will be very, very short. Call me optimistic, but if you think they're producing Model Ys at a high clip at Giga Austin, Giga Berlin, you ain't seen nothing yet. In conclusion, it would appear the high interest rates did very little impacting the sales of the automotive market. With interest rates set to decline, are we in for a turbocharge? The news can't get enough of comparing BYD to Tesla. The real competition lies in the internal combustion engine. About a 3% EV penetration in China, a 0.25% EV penetration in Europe, about 10% here in the United States. We are on the path to transitioning internal combustion engines into electrified vehicles. It won't be easy, but I guarantee you it will be lucrative. That's all I've got for you today. Be easy. Peace.